going on, everybody? Welcome into a Tuesday edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you this week by DraftKings. It's best ball week over at DK. We'll talk more about that later in the show, but still plenty of time to get some best balls fired up before we get to week one. Jeff, today's episode will be the FOMO-Cast, as we've dubbed it. Well, players that we like, players that we don't have enough of, maybe players that we don't have any shares of so far this season. So we each have our respective lists. We'll talk about a bunch of players we're trying to get in on before we get to week one. We do have a couple news items that we need to touch on, though, to begin the show, including a starting quarterback announcement from the Indianapolis Colts, Jeff. It will not be Anthony Richardson. It will be Daniel Jones out there for week one. And Shane Steichen is telling us beyond week one.
Yes, and that was big news. Just because we knew it was like the one legitimate job battle. I mean, yes, Cleveland. Okay, Joe Flacco's to start, a big deal. But this is the one where it's like a 50-50 job battle, right? That we had like two legitimate options on a team that has good personnel, like an offense that might be good if they get good quarterback play. Yeah, okay, Jeff. Going out on a limb saying if they get good quarterback play, they'll have a good offense. But you know what I mean? They have good assets. They have Josh Downs. They have Wells. They do have they have Pittman. They have good Warren. I say Wells. God, I'm so off today. Warren at tight end. They have Jonathan Taylor, for that matter. They have legitimately good pieces. And unlike the Browns, where I think there's a lot of other dysfunction, this is something that could matter for our fantasy league. So yes, this is a big deal to have this. Richardson, actually outproduced Jones in terms of like scoring and yards on his snaps and his drives in the preseason, but it is the preseason. He also notably got blown up against the Ravens, missed a coverage on that one there, and obviously had what happened last year. I think this was almost preordained. Unless Jones spiked himself, he was going to win the job.
Yeah, even the big highlight throw that was going around Twitter from Anthony Richardson last week in the preseason, where he lofts one across the field, perfect throw. I mean, that's kind of the sell with Anthony Richardson. You watch the all-22 version of that, and he has a wheel route wide open for a touchdown where multiple teammates are jumping around, pointing, throw it to this guy. And yes, he makes a miracle throw. That's all well and good. But I think the decision-making is ultimately what was a big part of this. And like you said, it's not like Daniel Jones showed out in these first two preseason games. He completed 53% of his passes. Like, this was not Daniel Jones definitively proving like I am the guy. I think there's a lot going on behind the scenes that we probably don't know about yet in terms of the Colts trust level in Anthony Richardson. Getting injured on like the fifth snap of the first preseason game certainly didn't help his case. The book is not written by any means on Richardson. It might be written for his time in Indianapolis. We'll see how this ends up playing out. If I'm Richardson, if I'm his representation, I'm just looking to get away from that organization. I'm looking for a fresh start somewhere else. But, the Colts are holding firm that they don't want this to be a week-to-week question mark, a series-to-series question mark like it was at times last season. I will say, though, Jeff, that is much easier said than done when Daniel Jones is your secure option.
Right. Exactly. And just given like what's happened so far with Richardson's development all along, it has been a disaster. Yeah. You mentioned that he may not have ever gotten a fair chance. There's a lot of Trey Lance vibes going on here that we haven't seen too much in games from Richardson. We saw more from Richardson than we ever saw from Lance, obviously, but it's a case there where maybe it's like, he stepped in the wrong situation. I think a lot of people are trying to manifest Richardson into being the next Sam Darnold, where in the right environment, he can be really good. And this was not the right environment. I will say this though, this wasn't the level of Jets dysfunction that Darnold had or Geno Smith before him. No. This is, they had a good offensive line. The Colts did. They have good playmakers on this team. It wasn't like dealing with the dregs that those quarterbacks had in their situations here. This is a situation which was better. It wasn't, elite. It wasn't chasing Higgins. It wasn't the Ravens. It wasn't anything like that, but this wasn't a bad setup. It's just, he was ill prepared for it, and maybe they rushed him into it. That part is probably true. The yo-yoing of Richardson, is he the starter? Is he not the starter? Last year, the way they handled him was ridiculous, I thought. This maybe gives him a chance in the long run. You could see a Bryce Young sort of scenario there where he comes back later in the season and he's actually okay. But he can get time to just watch and learn. But I don't get that vibe. I don't feel like they're trying to. This is in the furtherance of developing think this is done to protect Steichen's job more than it is, and yes, to give them a better chance this year. But I don't think this is a case like, oh yes, Richardson's a part of our future. We're doing this for his benefit. I don't get that vibe at all.
If they wanted to give that vibe, they could have said that. And I think that is an option PR wise. If that's how you want to spin it, I think that would be understandable. We've seen other organizations, like you said, with Bryce Young last year, put out that same spin. And, Bryce Young is one of several, obvious reclamation projects, and we'll still see on Bryce Young. I don't know if he's officially reclaimed yet, but you could point to Baker Mayfield, who was in a bad spot in Cleveland. You mentioned Sam Darnold with the Jets. Again, the book is not written by any means on Anthony Richardson. I'm just shocked at the degree to which the Colts never really gave this that much of a chance. And again, maybe that speaks to what they know behind the scenes. They've seen him in camp. They've seen him, every single day in practice. And if they don't like what they see, then that's probably a big part of the reason that they didn't even wait until after the third preseason game to name Daniel Jones the starter. But yeah, Steichen was pressed on that this morning and asked, is there a path to Anthony Richardson earning back this job? And he basically shut that down. He's like, look, unless Daniel Jones gets hurt, he's going to be our guy, which is what you're going to say. You're not going to install a starting quarterback and then, walk it back immediately and say, yeah, we'll see. We'll go week to week. But it just doesn't really seem like the Colts are all that invested right now in the future of Anthony Richardson. So very strange situation. I think Richardson, to me, I'm not a Colts fan. If anything, I root against the Colts as a Jags fan. But, you want to see what the upside is, right? And I think that's what's really frustrating if you're a Colts fan is you could say, yeah, this was a disaster. Yeah, Anthony Richardson ranks in the bottom percentile of every stat that matters in the games that he's played. It has not gone well. I'm not trying to mount too much of a case for him, but I think there's always going to be a little part of you that says, well, we never really saw it through.
Yep. The problem is you can't redo history. You can't okay, this is the multiverse. We have another edition here where Richardson is handled properly or handled a different way. We can't see if this will ever work. And, it just may be that he goes to Kevin O'Connell and he's much better there 2 years from now with the Vikings. Or maybe he just, he goes Trey Lance and he never does anything, never gets that real chance again. That's entirely possible too. I'm moving up Josh Downs. You convinced me of that a little bit earlier today when we were talking about Richardson and Jones on Sirius XM. I am going to move Downs up a little bit because of this. I might move Pittman up a little bit because of this as well, just the historical inaccuracy of Richardson's throws that I think it's going to help pure pass catchers a little bit and might hurt, Jonathan Taylor, although maybe not. I mean, Daniel Jones is a mobile quarterback in his own right. Maybe not Richardson level, but let's face it, he's been a running quarterback in his own right. So, maybe Taylor doesn't get hurt that much. And the thing is, Taylor does get more runs at the goal line, perhaps. Yes. But I think that helps a little bit. But maybe he gets fewer lanes to run through. I don't know. That's all speculation. But I think it does help Josh Downs the most. And that's the guy I'm moving up a little bit. And that's the guy, but that's also maybe confirming my priors because I like Josh Downs a lot. And Downs is also hurt right now too. We have to kind of keep that in mind too.
All right. Speaking of injured receivers, Jeff, we do have some news out of Tampa Bay as well. Jalen McMillan, of course, took that big hit in the preseason game. Yeah. He's going to be sidelined to begin the year, expected to place him on IR. Too early to say how many games he'll miss, but there are some estimates out there that they could hold him out through their bye week. So at that point, we're talking second half of the season. This is just more steam for Emeka Egbuka, who continues to impress, obviously down in Tampa Bay. And then in conjunction with McMillan, still not a whole lot on Chris Godwin. And we're getting to a point where we're close enough to week one where no news is now bad news. There were some reports trickling out of Tampa Bay that he's yet to resume doing anything full speed. He's not cutting on that ankle. I think we've known for a couple of weeks now that it was very likely that Chris Godwin would not be ready for week one. I think we have to start thinking about beyond week one now and, week 2, week 3, week 4. I don't know when we're going to see Chris Godwin back. So to me, there's now a pretty realistic scenario where there's a full month of Emeka Egbuka out there as the number 2 next to Mike Evans.
100% agree. And, we're seeing that at the NFFC and the ADP, and his name might come up a little later on our primary topic today, but over the last 5 days, he's wide receiver 36. Emeka Egbuka is average pick of 68. It's maybe, he's kind of jumped a tier. He's over your guy, Jacoby Myers now, slightly behind Travis Hunter, slightly behind Roma Dunze in that sort of level. A min pick of 49, a max pick of 103. And I bet you that range narrows even more over time now that we know that McMillan's on IR already too, through which means it misses at least the first, I think 6 weeks of the season. And early estimates from Rick Stroud are suggesting week 9 for McMillan, and with Godwin out for undetermined portion of time as well. Yeah, to the moon with Ibuka. I think a lot of people are going to be all over that.
People have been all over it. I think they're going to be even more all over it. And, it's interesting because we've seen so many rookie wide receivers, especially guys who are not like top 10 to 15 picks like Ibuka is. Those guys tend to come on over the second half of seasons, right? They need a little time to adjust. They get more comfortable. And then, second half of the year is when they really explode. Like, I almost wonder if we would see the opposite with Ibuka, where he just hits the ground running. And then the question becomes, like, if he plays as well as we think he can, and as well as he's played in the preseason, and as good as he's looked at training camp, the question is, what does it mean for Godwin? I am still a Godwin supporter. They just signed him to an extension. I think when he's ready, he's going to be out there. But again, if we expect this offense to be close to as good as it was last season, even without Liam Cohen, and Ibuka is a huge part of that, and he's averaging 70 yards and putting up 4 or 5 touchdowns through the first 8 or 9 weeks, where does Godwin fit in?
That's a good question, and I think it's also one of those cases there where I'm just down now a little bit more on the Bucs overall. The Tristan Wirfs thing that I always like to harp on, that we haven't even mentioned that yet. Are you lowering Baker Mayfield, Nick, because of all of this?
I not necessarily, because it seems like they already have like the natural replacement, right? Like if Emeka Egbuka was not Emeka Egbuka, I think we'd be saying, man, he's going to be down to Mike Evans for the first who knows how many weeks of the season. But because it feels like you already have the heir apparent on the roster, and we saw Baker Mayfield, be plenty sustainable with Godwin and Evans both missing time last year, I don't really think I'm moving him down. I mean, I don't really shop for quarterback very often in that range, unless it's the RotoWire Invitational where I'm on the clock from 2 to 6 a.m. and I'm asleep and I auto draft Patrick Mahomes instead of taking Jackson Smith and Jigba.
Oh no.
Yeah, that'll happen sometimes. But no, I'm not really moving Baker Mayfield down. I think if they didn't have Egbuka, you would certainly have to think about it. But I tend to be waiting on quarterback or taking one of the early quarterbacks anyway.
Yeah, I have been avoiding that range. Baker, Mahomes, Knicks. I don't have any of those 3. I used to get Dak at a lower price. Now Dak is going in that range. Sometimes jumps a couple of those quarterbacks. But that's kind of the range. You're right. Unless it's a super flex league, I'm not really in that market.
I saw Dak and Kyler Murray, by the way, go ahead of Patrick Mahomes in an NFFC draft over the weekend.
Interesting. I think that's a big mistake. Murray over Mahomes. That means that Mahomes is really slipping or someone's really jumping Murray. In either case, I disagree with it. I don't love Kyler Murray. I did get him in a Madison league where we were all waiting on quarterbacks, but aside from that, I hate what the Cardinals did this offseason, or what they didn't do this offseason. I don't like that he hasn't really shown those signs of improvement. He'll have his great games, and he'll have his, like, what is he doing sort of games. And meanwhile, in the NFFC, it's 6 points for a passing touchdown. So a running quarterback helps you, but here's the newsflash. Kyler Murray isn't running as much as he used to either. They're not designing these run plays for him. Unless that changes this year, an extra year after the injury, maybe, but I don't see it. I think that's kind of crazy.
All right, before we get to our FOMO players, we've got a couple sponsors to pass along. We are brought to you, as always, by the great folks over at Circa. Circa Million and Circa Survivor are back with a massive $21 million in guaranteed prizes this season. Circa Million, you pick 5 games against the spread each week, 18 weeks of action with 126 ways to win. $1 million goes to the winner, $6 million guaranteed for the contest overall. Circa Survivor, you know the drill. 1 pick a week, no point spread, last the longest to win it all, at least $15 million guaranteed in Circa Survivor. Enter in Nevada, play from anywhere, $21 million guaranteed. Visit circasports.com for details. We're also brought to you by Renegade Fantasy. Fantasy football players, aren't you done watching your season crumble because of injuries or underperforming players? Join the RotoWire League right now over on the Renegade Fantasy app, the only app that lets you substitute players in real time. Go to rotowire.renegadefantasy.com and hit join today. With Renegade, you're not just a GM, you're the coach. No more losing Sundays, no more lost points. You call the shots, you make the moves, you win the league. Step out of the luxury box and onto the field. This is fantasy football without limits. This is Renegade Fantasy. Join the RotoWire League right now, and you could go win. Visit rotowire.renegadefantasy.com and join that league today. All right, Jeff, pretty simple concept here. Players that you have not drafted enough of this season, players you've maybe not necessarily been avoiding, but whether it be due to pricing in an auction or your draft slot, you're worried that your portfolio may not be stocked enough with these guys. So who do you want to start off with?
So I wanted to start off with Travion Henderson, but I actually got him last night in my long-standing home league, Amaki, the league that started RotoWire, the league that's been my longest running league, and I got him in the 4th round. Now it's a super flex league, so that's part of it there. But I'll pivot. I'm going to do Ricky Pearsall on the San Francisco 49ers. And you and I have extolled the virtues of Pearsall a little bit there. I know you in particular have been in on Pearsall and have got him in a number of leagues. I keep seeming to miss him. And the way the Niners preseason has been shaping up, this is to my regret. I think he and George Kittle are just going to get so many targets. You know, Jawan Jennings might be back in week 1 with the calf injury and his hold-in situation. But we know that Brandon Ayuk is not going to be back until at least week 6. We know that, the other options are all banged up a little bit too. Debo is gone. This is a big year. Pearsall is a big part of this offense. And honestly, I think it's going to be that year 2 leap. I think he's finally going to get all these reps up with Brock Purdy. He's healthy now. He's out there getting those reps, but so does everybody else. You know, who else likes Ricky Pearsall? Everybody else likes Ricky Pearsall.
Yeah, it's not quite Travion Henderson level in terms of the steam, but it's getting there, Jeff. And I'm looking at the last week at the NFFC. He's gone as early as pick 49 overall. Average ADP coming in at about 66. That makes him wide receiver 34. So, I mean, you'll see him now jump Rome Odunze, jump Jerry Jeudy, occasionally jump guys like Rashee Rice and Jalen Waddle, but he's right in that Travis Hunter, Emeka Ibuka zone. And look, I love Ibuka. I think the hype is real here. I still would much rather take Ricky Pearsall at the same draft slot than Emeka Ibuka. You know, I know, Pearsall has done very little in terms of production in the NFL, but I feel better about his full season dependability.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I trust the Niners play calling a little bit more than I do the Bucs because they're on their 3rd offensive coordinator in 3 years. And I know it's an in-house hire there, so it should be similar, but you never know. I think it's interesting. You mentioned Ibuka, and we talked about him at the top of the show too. I don't have any Ibuka either. I haven't gotten him once in my leagues, and that is to my chagrin. He was on my list of players that I've also had FOMO about that I really wish. Lee asked a great question. Lee Vang in the chat asked, he asked about, do you go with Pearsall at his ADP or Jacoby Myers from the Raiders at his ADP? You know the answer to that one there, but the proper answer, and the thing is, we both have ended up with Myers. But the thing is, I'm ending up landing on Myers after I just miss out on Pearsall. That's what's really happening to me. It's not necessarily I'm choosing that, but it's resulting in that. I'm not willing to leap on Pearsall as so much as I'm instead of like choosing Myers over. But yeah, that's like I didn't get my target. This is the guy I'm going to get, who I'm plenty happy with, because I do like Jacoby Myers quite a bit.
Yeah, Jacoby Myers is like discounted Devontae Smith to me in some ways, where there's a pretty defined range, I think, on what you expect from him, whereas we don't know the range with Ricky Pearsall. There could be more downside, there could be injury issues, who knows. I think it partially depends on where you're at build-wise at that point in the draft. You're like, are you light at receiver? Do you need to make hay? Do you need a guy who could finish top 15, top 20? Jacoby Myers did that last season, but he's always, on the fringes of that at best, whereas you could certainly foresee a breakout for Ricky Pearsall. So to me, it's an upside versus safety equation, two very different players, very different situations. I've taken Myers over Pearsall more frequently, but a lot of those drafts were months ago when we had no idea what was happening with the 49ers receiver room. I think given the choice right now, Jeff, I would embrace the relative risk and chase the upside with Pearsall.
Yeah, I get that there. And I probably will the next time I get a chance. But I mean, I get that chance, as we said. You're kind of the vagaries of the snake draft because it's early enough that where you're
Right.
drafting matters a little bit. You're almost, in many cases, if you're at the right end of the draft, you kind of get them at close to ADP. If you're on the other side, you really have to leap them there. And that's always frustrating. Nick, who's the first FOMO guy for you?
It's T. Higgins, Jeff. It is T. Higgins.
All right.
have almost no T. Higgins in my redraft profile. Got some best ball, of course, but got everybody, it feels like, in best ball. I'm alarmed at what I've seen from the Bengals defense so far in the preseason. That has made me higher on T. Higgins and Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow and Chase Brown. I don't know that anything is solved defensively. I think this is a team that's going to be racing to 30 points every single week. And look, when I've had the choice, I've usually taken Jackson Smith and Jigba over T. Higgins. I don't have a lot of Garrett Wilson. I didn't even put him on the list as a FOMO guy just because I worry about Justin Fields at this point. But when I have the choice and those guys are on the board, I'm almost always clicking on JSN. And, I'm wondering, am I too far against T. Higgins? Am I worrying too much about the injury risk? On a per game basis, T. Higgins was a top 10 receiver last season. I think in your mind, you're like, man, can this offense really sustain those two guys? I mean, it did last year. And I think if T. Higgins stays healthier, if you guarantee me that he could play 15, 16 games, I would be a lot more interested. So as a Bengals guy, Jeff, am I too worried about T. Higgins missing games? Because that is what's holding me back.
Maybe a little bit. The last 2 years, he's been under contract strife. He's been playing under franchise tag, or am I going to get extended or not? And I think that's one of the reasons why it's made sense for him to kind of make the business decision. He will never say that. He was often accused of that, in fact, but I don't mean it as a pejorative either. I think if it's a borderline call, you have to be a little safe, and maybe he's more willing to play through a little bit, or maybe it's just that, it's just, he's got that confidence now. He's a made man. I think you are right to have FOMO. I think he's going to have another big year. And I think probably enough that I would take him over JSN at this point in time.
Okay.
I've had to make that choice a couple of times. I think early I too landed on JSN, but lately I've been going listing more towards the Higgins side. For one, I mean, I trust the Bengals offense so much more than I do the Seahawks offense. I think that's a big aspect of it here. What are we going to get out of Sam Darnold? What are we going to get out of this revamped offensive line, revamped offensive play, revamped play calling? I don't know for sure. Yes, JSN should get copious volume in terms of being maybe not the only game in town, but the major game in town. But I think Higgins will get you more bang per target, though. I think, as much as I like JSN, I think Higgins is going to be a guy that has a lot more upside for what he does. So I'm with you on that one there.
All right. Who's next on your list?
Omarion Hampton. I missed the window when he was coming a little cheaper there. And I don't think I'm willing to pay the third round price. Now, I've seen some leagues where he's dropped back down to the fourth round, and I'm kind of there for that if it happens. But I regret not getting any Hampton so far. I think the Chargers are going to be able to run the ball. I think they're going to run the ball frequently, even with the injury, the injuries that they've had, especially to Rashawn Slater. I think Hampton's a guy that is just going to have a really bang up rookie year. And I wish I had some shares of him. I won't take him over James Cook, but maybe versus Breece Hall, I would take, Hampton versus Henderson's an interesting choice. Hampton's still usually going earlier, but if there is a league where Henderson continues to skyrocket and goes over Hampton, I'll get him. But I don't have him anywhere. I don't have him in my dynasties. And I was drafting in the wrong spot. And it is a brag to say that I was drafting after where he is going, but I wish I had some Hampton so far.
Well, I mean, even Hampton versus T. Higgins is a debate, right? I mean, it's early enough in the draft that you could certainly go in either direction. And, that's part of the reason that I don't have a ton of T. Higgins. I'm usually shopping for a running back in that range. I have way more James Cook than I would like at this point. And part of that is just protecting myself from that next zone of running backs, right? Where it's like, who knows where Trevion Henderson's going to go? You can't depend that he's just going to be there, not that interested in Kenneth Walker. And then all of a sudden you're into Kamara and Chuba Hubbard and guys like that. So yeah, it's not necessarily just running back versus running back. It's, what are you doing at that spot in the draft? But yeah, I'm with you on Hampton. We certainly have to see what the what the Chargers offense looks like, what the split is ultimately going to be if and when Najee Harris is back up to speed. But it's a great situation for him to be in. Not having Rashawn Slater, it's brutal, but it doesn't completely put me off of the Chargers offense. So I think that's a pretty good one by you. Before we talk some DraftKings, Jeff, I will get to one more. And this is one kind of like T. Higgins, where it's not like, man, I've been trying to get him. It's more like, what if I'm wrong? Mike Evans. I have no Mike Evans. I've been avoiding Mike Evans. And look, he is one of two healthy receivers that we like right now in Tampa Bay. And, things are shaping up for him, I think, especially early in the season until Godwin's back, until McMillan's back later in the year. Like, they're not going to have that depth. Like, they're going to lean more heavily than I was forecasting on Mike Evans. So I've been taking Devontae Adams over him. I would even consider, a DJ Moore. I would consider a Tetairoa McMillan over Mike Evans, but I've been avoiding him, and it's starting to creep into my mind of, man, well, if I like Baker Mayfield, if I like Emeka Egbuka, if I think the Bucs offense is going to be really good, that may require Mike Evans to have another big year, Jeff.
Yeah, and let's face it, there's been like 1 year out of the last 5 where Mike Evans has let you down. The fact is he's there for us. He's always there for us, and I think that that's one. I'm with you on that one there. I think, I would click Evans over Adams. I would click Evans over Marvin Harrison, Marvin Harrison Jr. For many of the reasons we talked about earlier about my distrust of Arizona. I think that's where I'm at there. And the Godwin news, and the fears about Godwin only kind of increase that. Yes, is there on the merits? Could Evans have that cliff year? It's possible. He needed a little bit of hijinks to get to his 1,000 yards last year. Missed some games, so that's always in the range of outcomes a little bit there. But yeah, I'm with you on maybe regretting Evans there. I do have some Evans. I wasn't as down on him as you were, but in recent drafts I haven't been getting him as often. Maybe because I've been hanging out with you too much there. I always have that nagging voice in my head that, oh, maybe this is the year he falls off.
Well, you're going to hear a lot more of it on the golf course this week out in Vegas.
Yes.
I can tell you that. All right, we'll have some more FOMO players coming your way in just a moment. But first, a message from our pals over at DraftKings. Football season is right around the corner, and there's no better way to lock in your fantasy dominance early than with Best Ball on DraftKings, where you draft once and ride your roster all season long. And right now, DraftKings is giving all customers a can't-miss offer. Draft one, get one. Enter a lineup in the $15 million Best Ball contest for just $20, and you'll score another Best Ball ticket to play free for a share of $15 million, giving you a second shot to win big. It's easy. Just draft your team once, no weekly management required, and let your top scorers automatically start each week. Across the whole season, every breakout star, every clutch play, every touchdown will count toward your quest for a share of $15 million. Look, I absolutely love doing these Best Ball drafts on DraftKings. Super easy, super quick. You don't have to worry about the waiver wire, all that in-season management. I'll tell you, so far, been drafting way too much of my guy, Brian Thomas Jr., getting a lot of Chris Godwin, a lot of Jordan Mason later in drafts. It's been so much fun to enter these Best Ball leagues, try out different strategies, build out a portfolio of your favorite NFL players. You could download the DraftKings Daily Fantasy app now to draft your $20 Best Ball lineup to play for a share of $15 million and get a second ticket to play free for a share of $15 million. That's 2 chances to win big without ever setting your lineup again. Draft one, get one, only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY at 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-78-97777 or visit ccpg.org. 18 plus in most eligible states, but age varies by jurisdiction. Eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. One per customer. Enter the Best Ball $15 million headliner contest by 9/4/25 to get one bonus entry. $20 entry fee required. Reward expires in 30 days. See terms at DraftKings.com/NFL-best-ball. Sponsored by DK. All right. Record speed, I think, by me, Jeff, on the DraftKings read. Still plenty of time, of course, to get in over at DraftKings. Like you just heard, $15 million on the line coming up in that week 1 contest. So make sure you go check everything out over at DK. This gives us an opportunity, Jeff, to talk a little best ball here. And, I think we talk so much redraft on this show, on the radio. We're always diving in on the NFFC that, it's always interesting to compare strategy-wise. Like, are there certain players to you who you say, all right, I'm really comfortable with that guy in best ball, redraft, maybe not so much?
All of them. All of those players. It's the most commonly used phrase in like fantasy sports analysis.
It's a great cop out.
Yes, it is the ultimate cop out. Yes, of course, there are certain players that I feel that way. I would say wide receivers, like a Jameson Williams, to me is like the ultimate of those guys because he just doesn't get the full range of targets. You need to hit on a big play, and inevitably he will hit on big plays. And sometimes it's a run, but you're not going to get 10 targets a game from him on average. There'll be some weeks where maybe you will because he's got that great matchup, but on balance, he's not a target monster. So he perfectly fits that rubric.
Yeah, somebody like Zay Flowers for me as well, where the week to week numbers are not always ideal. Last year there were more down weeks than there were spike weeks, certainly, but like the overall profile ends up being okay in terms of total fantasy points scored, which is ultimately what this is about. And you don't have to worry about necessarily time in the market on when those spike weeks come for him in best ball. So yeah, I think you're right to highlight receivers more than anything. It's also way easier as you get later into a draft. And one of the benefits of DraftKings is you're doing these 20-round drafts. You're going deeper than a lot of other sites. And, just firing away at guys who I think you would pause if you're looking at in a 14, 15 round redraft and say, man, do I really want to invest here? Do I want to be a little more safe? I mean, when you got 18th, 19th round picks coming in over on DraftKings, like I'm firing away at upside there much more than I would a redraft league, where sometimes you get in your head and you're thinking, man, I might actually need this guy. I'm not going to take a shot on a player that, in redraft, I might end up cutting 2 weeks into the year.
Agreed. And I think you probably embrace a little bit more volatility in the quarterback position as well when you're playing this way. I think that's another thing where you're going to have multiple shots at the bites of the apple that, you want to make sure you get, full-time playing time jobs. Don't get me wrong about that. But in terms of like the boom or bust potential at quarterback, yeah, I might take a little bit more embrace a little bit more risk on that. Maybe go a little less on the running quarterbacks and more on the passing quarterbacks there and hope for the big yardage days is another way of playing that there as well.
All right, go sign up over at DraftKings. Again, you see the offer right there on your screen. Go check everything out over at DraftKings. If you are listening live, you can rewind. You can hear the full promo. You can check it out over on YouTube. We got a ton of DraftKings best ball content up on RotoWire.com as well. I know our friend Mario Puig just posted a great article this week taking a look at some targets and some fades. So still plenty of time to jump in those contests. All right, Jeff, I think we're back to you for your next FOMO player.
It is. And in this instance, it's not one player, it's a concept. It's the dead zone running backs.
Ooh.
Joe Bartle wrote an article talking about the concept of the dead zone and whether it truly exists. Are we being too dogmatic avoiding running backs in this category? We're talking Kenneth Walker, Alvin Kamara, James Conner is probably, Joe Mixon used to be in that group, but he's actually already graduated out of that there in the wrong sort of way. And maybe it illustrates why we were avoiding him in the first place. But what if we're wrong? What if there's real value in those running backs? In Kamara, he's been on a bad team for years, but he gets so much volume, especially in the passing game. Kenneth Walker could be a big boom player if he's healthy in a given year. Maybe that Seattle offensive line is improved. But I have 0 shares in redraft leagues of those 3 running backs in particular. Mm-hmm. I don't know. What if we're wrong about that one?
I think this is the best pick yet, Jeff. This is a great one because I think you and I are in agreement on these running backs. We have been since we started talking football on Sirius XM. And, of that group, Chuba Hubbard is the guy that I have the most exposure to. Kamara, every now and then I'll make that click, but I'm more and more convinced that the Saints are going to be a total train wreck this season. And it might just be a situation to avoid. You could talk me into a few shares of Chris Olave, but that's really about it. What I would say is that it is extremely likely that at least 1 or 2 running backs in this range end up being really productive, right? Like the entire tier isn't going to go off. The entire tier isn't going to completely tank. But if we're talking Walker, Kamara, Chuba Hubbard, James Conner, you could throw RJ Harvey, DeAndre Swift, I think, into that group as well. Some of those guys are going to play well. It's just part of the reason that this is the dead zone is trying to decide which is which, right? And before I get to the dead zone, I would ideally like to have 2 running backs on my roster. Easier said than done. You can't always break it down that way. That's how you end up with a bunch of James Cook in your portfolio because it drops off right after that. But I'll ask you this. So I'll give you again, Walker, Kamara, Hubbard, Connor, Harvey, Swift. Like, which of those guys are you the most out on at cost?
Connor
Okay.
by a wide amount. I think recent injury history, two things marked against him there. Distrust of the Cardinals, the identification of a viable alternative keeps me away from them. I'd say Walker's second because I think Zach Charbonnet is actually a legitimate pivot too for them. And I do get some Charbonnet, although his cost I've noticed is a little bit higher than any other of the like high profile backups there. Like you can get Benson for a round or two cheaper than you can Charbonnet, for instance, there. But I don't suspect I'll have Connor anywhere where I didn't already have him say as a keeper in a dynasty.
Yeah, I think for me, the guy that I have the most FOMO on, and he did make my list, by the way, in this group is DeAndre Swift. And I don't think anybody is pounding the table for, DeAndre Swift is so underrated. Like, it's not really the case.
No.
It's more, okay, Roshan Johnson, Kyle Monungai, Travis Homer are your next three running backs. All three of those guys currently banged up, by the way. And, if we have all this optimism on Caleb Williams and Colston Loveland and DJ Moore and Roma Dunze and eventually Luther Burden, like, should that apply to DeAndre Swift? And I haven't been drafting him a ton because I don't love the player, but, historically being the starting running back for a Ben Johnson coach team has been very profitable. And, he's not Jahmyr Gibbs. He's not David Montgomery. He's probably a lower tier, perhaps talent-wise, than both of those guys. But like even a lower-ish level outcome, like a mid-level outcome for DeAndre Swift, if the Bears offense takes off in the way that some people think it can, could be really, really productive. So he's kind of the guy of that group where I wonder, all right, should I be taking that chance a little more often? Like I'm always taking Isaiah Pacheco over him. And, we've talked a lot about the upside with him. We don't have to go down that road, but I am starting to wonder, should I diversify that a little bit?
For sure. And I think the price on Swift has gone up a little bit too, as like Mixon, for instance, has fallen off. That takes away one alternative from him. And I used to kind of put Swift in the same group as Pacheco, and that's not the case anymore. Pacheco's actually rising. He's actually costing a lot more than he used to too. So that's another aspect of that there. That I used to put Swift at the kind of the start of that next tier. Instead, he's kind of crept up to the dead zone, which actually truthfully where he belongs. We actually know what Swift kind of is as a player. Maybe not under Ben Johnson, but we kind of do. Remember, he spent a year in Detroit. Right. I think he overlapped with Johnson. I need to double check on that there. But the point is, they love Swift so much they went out and they drafted Jahmyr Gibbs. Right. And they signed David Montgomery. So that kind of tells you where they were with him. So that does temper my enthusiasm with Swift, even though I do have a couple of shares of him.
Well, you could go both ways, right? Where it's like, okay, Ben Johnson didn't like him in Detroit, but then if he doesn't like him so much, why did they not upgrade that position when they had a chance to do it, either in the draft or in free agency? I don't know. Maybe the Bears are always one of those teams that, like, when the Brian Robinson news came out, it's like, oh, Chicago, they'll be in on him. They haven't been in on anybody yet. I thought Nick Chubb would have made sense for the Bears, and they just haven't done it. So until they bring in another running back, I think we do have to respect DeAndre Swift maybe a little bit more. I'm going to throw one out to you, Jeff. I know we said like no early guys, but I will say I don't have a whole lot of Ashton Jeanty. I got some best ball Jeanty. I don't think I have him in a single redraft league. I took Derrick Henry over him in a big draft last week. Obviously there are plenty of receivers you could pivot to in that range. And I don't necessarily love taking rookie running backs or rookies in general inside the first round. I feel like more often than not, that does not tend to work out, especially when that rookie is not in an ideal situation. It's not necessarily a bad situation, but it's not ideal for Jeanty in Vegas. So this is one where, I'm willing to, if he does go off as a rookie, I guess I'll reinvest with the third overall pick next year. I'm willing to pass on that one in year one, but I'm going to be feeling it if Jeanty comes out and runs for 150 yards in week one.
Yeah, I got some early Jeanty. I haven't gotten recent Jeanty as the case may be. Maybe because more I'm like, I trust your guy, Derrick Henry, more. I've got Henry over Jeanty. I've got a lot of those receivers over Jeanty as well. So that's makes it hard to click on him. But yeah, the thing is, if it comes down to like Puka Nacua versus Ashton Jeanty, I'm going to click on Jeanty, I think.
Yeah.
If it comes down to Henry or, Amon-Ra St. Brown or Nico Collins, I'm going to go with those guys over Jeanty at this point in time. In part because I'm getting some cold feet on the Raiders. I think there's a lot of problems with this team, and I still think they're apparent. The one thing that might work in their favor is that they're going to try to feed Jeanty a lot to keep the defense off the field, because the defense is going to be tragic. So you just in terms of usage, it might be there, but can he withstand that usage? I don't know. He was checked for a concussion in the last preseason game, came back and obviously trucked somebody and scored a touchdown after that. So he's just fine, obviously. Yeah. But I think it's not that I won't be drafting Jeanty. I'm not going out of my way to get more of them.
Yeah, I mean, what it comes down to is if you're taking him with the 7th overall pick in your draft, like you now are requiring an all-time great rookie season just to meet that draft value, and again, he could, like, talent-wise, I'm a firm believer in Ashton Jeanty. I have no questions about that. Nothing that he showed in that second preseason game would dissuade you from thinking that, but it's just, sight unseen, Raiders running back, bad offensive line, bad defense, new 70-some-year-old head coach. Like there are just enough things here where I'm like, all right, this is not a perfect enough situation for me where I'm willing to take that chance. All right, sure. I have a couple more quick ones on my list that we can do, but who's left on yours?
Lamar Jackson. I know it's early quarterback, but not first 2 rounds, and I haven't been the 3rd round quarterback drafter so far. I want at least one Lamar share, though. He's just so good. I did get Josh Allen in a super flex league last night. Lamar was already gone. I would have gone Lamar over Allen, but I want at least one share of him there. I feel like I'm going to regret that not having him, because I think he might have another repeat of last year, and that could just be so choice to have him going for you there. Going later in drafts, more like end game. This isn't middle game. I didn't get any early Jordan Mason at the proper price. I haven't got any Jordan Mason yet, and I'm on board with your analysis on him. So he's actually a major FOMO guy. I've been like 3 or 4 picks away like 4 times so far. I need to get a little Jordan Mason.
I can't empathize with you on Mason. I'm stocked up on Jordan Mason, as you know. So, but no, that is a really good one. And, we're now starting to see some bounce back on that, where people are like coming back around on Aaron Jones. And I get it. He's fallen far enough that you're not going to take like a massive hit on that if it doesn't work out. But I am still firmly Mason over Jones at cost. I'm going to give you Darnell Mooney, Jeff. This is kind of out of left field. Somewhat conflicting reports, as far as his health goes. And there was one that came through the day that I think it was the day I did my NFFC draft that said, he's week to week. Yeah, we're confident he'll be back at some point this season. Like, okay, well, that doesn't sound ideal. And then there was a report like 2 days later that he's actually making much better progress. And you might miss some time to begin the year, but could be back early in the season. If it is the latter, I feel like I'm missing out. I had a chance to take him in my most important draft. I didn't. You know how much I love Penix, how much I love London, how high I am on the Falcons offense. I think there's going to be plenty there for Darnell Mooney, whenever he does end up returning. Now, if it's late enough in the season, maybe it doesn't matter and it's just going to be kind of a wash for fantasy. But if he's back on the field week 2, week 3, I think he's going to be somebody that we're going to look at as a pretty major leaper in terms of the ROI based on where he's fallen.
He's so affordable. Wide receiver 55 in the last 10 days. So yeah, absolutely. You should get a little bit of that, because if Penix does, follow up what he started off and it looks like he's pretty good, then I think that's going to work out really well.
Yeah. I mean, Moody didn't have the big leap that London did with the Penix games at the end of the year, but went 5 for 82, 2 for 37, 11 total targets over the last 2 games of the year. Got nothing in that week 15 game against Vegas. So you don't have the same like encouraging sample, I guess. And maybe that's a little bit of a part of it, but there's just not a whole lot behind him in that Atlanta receiving room, right? I mean, I guess if you're a Kyle Pitts believer, then maybe that contrasts with the optimism for Darnell Mooney. But, all of a sudden you're into Ray McLeod, Kadarius Hodge as your 3 and 4. And again, I believe in Penix. I think this could be a really good offense. I think the Falcons could be a dark horse to win that division. And you're going to need more than Drake London and Bijan Robinson in order to do that. Anybody else left for you?
Yeah, Matthew Golden. Don't have any of him yet. The Green Bay wide receiver room is battling attrition right now, to say the least. Golden is showing up with great hands so far. He had, although it's kind of funny, I think on the day that Robert Mays was doing his tour, he's visiting a lot of the team's training camps. Golden had his first drop of training camp, perhaps, or one of his rare drops after extolling the virtues of Golden's hands there. But Robert Mays is from The Athletic, does great work over there. And so I listen to their podcast on the regular, but I feel like Golden is going to get more than your usual Green Bay wide receiver accompaniment of targets. I still think that Jordan Love is a really good quarterback, and we'll start to see it a little bit more this year. If, of course, that left thumb injury isn't something that lingers into the regular season and affects his performance. But I want to have at least one share of Golden.
He's a really interesting one because he's now officially in that, like, guys we think are good but have red flags zone at wide receiver. And I think that previous tier to me probably ends with Jacoby Myers if you're locking in that safety. So then that next group would be Stephon Diggs, Deebo Samuel, Matthew Golden, Jordan Addison, Jawan Jennings, Khalil Shakir, Cooper Kupp. And there's
wide receiver dead zone.
Somewhat. I mean, I like a lot of these guys. It's like
right.
like Stephon Diggs in the best case scenario, or even a 80% best case scenario, I think could be really good. That could be a nice value at pick 80 overall. Jawan Jennings, all these concerns with the injury and the contract, those could very well evaporate over the next month. You got some level of safety in Shakir. Kupp is the guy I'm just really not that interested in that tier. I mean, I like Addison a lot, but obviously you're lopping off 3 games at the beginning of the season. But my general point is that Matthew Golden as a rookie is kind of the odd man out in that group. Agreed.
And he sticks out like a sore thumb on that one there. Ideal tier for your wide receiver 4. I don't want him as one of my top 3, but as your flex, as your bye week wide receiver, I think it's ideal. And you can go down even to Josh Downs on that one there and include him in that grouping as well, especially now as we were talking earlier with the Daniel Jones news too. So but yeah, I think he does stand apart from them. He's not like the others for sure.
All right, we'll wrap it up there, Jeff. The Brewers have rallied back. They're now down just 1 in the top of the 6. So I need to go watch the Brewers game, but great hosting with you as always. We'll have another pod coming your way later this week, live from the Circa Sportsbook out in Las Vegas. Want to thank all of our sponsors, DraftKings. Go check out all their best ball contests. Circa, the presenting sponsor of this pod throughout the season, and go check out Renegade Fantasy. You could join that RotoWire League, right now. You can visit rotowire.renegadefantasy.com. Go join that league. Should be a ton of fun this season. Very unique platform over on Renegade Fantasy. Jeff, I will see you a little over 24 hours from now in Las Vegas, Nevada.
Indeed. Looking forward to it.